once in a while you get shown in the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right.
A tie-dye dress, she was a psychedelic mess. We toured through the north, south, east, and west. We sold some mushroom tea, we sold some ecstasy, we sold nitrous, opium, acid, heroin, and PCP. And now I hear the police coming after me. Yes, now I hear the police coming after me. The one scarlet with the flowers in her hair, she's got the police coming after me.
But there ain't nothing wrong with the way she moves. All scarlet begonias and a touch of the blues. Wrong with the love that's in her eye. I had to learn the hard way just to let it pass by. Let it pass by. Oh, just to let it pass by.
Master, we must put on the Fringe FM.
Of course, Igor. Anything else would be monstrous.
What's the matter? You wanna live forever?
Did you make contact with aliens? Were you taken to another planet, to a mothership? How did they communicate with... Can you tell me what they look like? Can you tell me how many of them there were? Were you given food?
But the teachers are alive. They're not books. They are the very living essences of nature itself.
What a strange person.
Unbelievably powerful supercomputer that's running our reality, and we don't have a clue as to how to operate it.
So when maybe you or somebody else creates an AGI system, and you get to ask her one question, what would that question be? What's outside the simulation?
Say in your mind, say to yourself, I am more than my physical body, because I am more than physical matter. I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world.
Welcome to Lighting the Void.
All broadcasting live from a shack on a hill in the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. This is Lighting the Void live, and we are on Fringe.fm, YouTube, KTLK Digital Broadcasting, and Facebook. So far, no strikes, no mentions of you broke this rule or that rule. So we're still here, and pretty good show last night. I hope we still have people that call in tonight. The call-in number is 501-777-5631. We're going to continue our discussion with War in Heaven, talking about what happens after we die. I'm going to drag this thing on until I can't drag it on no more. If you want to see the chats, because there's a bunch of chat rooms, but like trying to watch 5 of them is really, really hard, okay? And so I'll turn that off. It's really hard. So the easiest ones for me to see right now, until I come up with a different setting, is going to be, yes, I'm back in Arkansas. Jessica, what's up, Jessica? Sir Wolf, Word Salad. The easiest ones that I'm going to be able to see are going to be in the Facebook. Not Facebook. Yeah, Facebook and YouTube, because I'm using StreamYard on this one. I'm trying to switch to the software that I like, because I can be a little bit more creative with that. But StreamYard makes it pretty easy to do. If you can support us, please do so. We need it. And yeah, we just desperately need any donations. And the people that have donated, if you don't have to keep doing it, right? Like, if you've donated, thank you. We're so grateful for that. You don't have to keep doing it, even though we really appreciate it. But if you haven't, I know some people have listened and they've gotten, they've just donated a few bucks. Man, that stuff helps out a lot to keep this going. And we have the Gumroad store. Now, the Gumroad store, I have a free thing you can download, which is like guided relaxation stuff. It's just my voice guiding you to relax, which is the first stage of like the out-of-body experience, right? Is total relaxation, mind and body and everything. And then you can get some other stuff too there if you would like. All right. What else? Is there any other follow-ups we got to do? No, tonight I wanted to get into this book and talk about the Invisible College. I left Gareth's email, the gentleman that started this whole journey, that our discussions have been on about what happens after we die. You know, the gentleman that's reaching the end stages of his life. He's got ALS. He emailed us. He said that I could share his contact information. So I did. If you look in the descriptions in the last video, his email is there. Don't go looking him up, trying to find him on the internet, stuff like that. I'm sure it seems like a common name, so you probably won't find him. Hell, I don't know. You might, but he hasn't reached back to me about anybody's emails or anything. If you do email him, I would ask you sincerely to do it with compassion. And I probably shouldn't even have to say that. But anyways, we'll get into this. So the idea here is if you're just catching up with us, is that this book was, let me make sure I'm pronouncing this guy's name right, because I don't want to misrepresent anybody here, even if I think it's ridiculous. And it's not, like, this stuff isn't totally ridiculous, by the way. Not all of it, for sure. But his name is Kyle Griffith, and he wrote a book. It was actually in 1990, but he started writing it in the late 80s. And he wrote a book called War in Heaven, The Invisible College, War in Heaven. And so we talked about the backstory of this book, and the premise of it is basically, and I have to recap this for people that are just joining us. Sorry for y'all that have been here for a while, but the premise of this book is that when we pass away, there is a place that we go to, which is known as the Astral realm. You and I know that place as a place that we can get out of body, or it's another place where the collective is, where the blueprints, in Western mysteries, it's in the realm of Yesod, right? It's kind of in that realm where the blueprints of manifestation are before they come into physical manifestation. And they actually say in the Golden Dawn that the physical realm is like a subdivision of the astral realm. So that's kind of where, not only where all this is speculation, of course, but not only were all the blueprints of things are before they become physical. That could mean anything, like you're an idea, an egregore, anything, right? Before it actually becomes physical, belongs in this realm. Also, it is the realm where people's dreams kind of mingle. There's from my experience, there's an actual, and Robert Monroe calls this locale 1 or 2, I believe, where this physical realm that we live in right now is directly right there next to it. So if you get good at it, like Dr. Stylianos Teteshlis, better known as Dasklos, talks about, if you get good at doing this, getting out of body and going in this realm, you can affect the physical realm, which is pretty crazy. Like, that's like Ghost, you know? Which I've managed to do that once, but I would still have to do it like a lot more times to make sure that it's a solid thing. That you can't get past the scientific method. It does find the truth. And I'm not talking about subjective truth. So before I derail, this realm is the realm where people, when they cross, their etheric bodies, I guess their souls are here before they cross over to whatever's after this. So this book explains that there are these people called the Theocrats that are there, that were once maybe like us, if I'm understanding this correctly. And they instead of reincarnating and taking a chance to reincarnate and going through some kind of suffering or something like that. What's up, Heartlines? Good to have you here. They trick you, and how they trick you. And this is another, this is one trick they do. How they trick you is they act like that you're in heaven, or they act like your relatives or something like that. And then you go on to, you get tricked, and I guess they can eat your soul, so to speak. Another thing that he says that they do is pretty much everything that we do here in reality, that we gather in crowds when our undivided focused attention, whether it be the Super Bowl, church, the electronic media, or things like that, they're vamping that energy off of us too. And you've heard this before. Other people have called it loosh and things like that, right? So we talked about the Theocrats, the Theocratic bands. We've talked about the electronic mind control part of it, that he's talking about the soul, mind, and consciousness. The history of theocracy, the history of this group, and now we're into the Invisible College. And I want to say, last night, Genevieve's call was great. Chris's call was great. And speaking of which, I'm going to pull the phones up over here on this other screen, so even if I don't hear it, that's been known to happen, it'll flash, and I can see it. Should have did that before the show, right? Okay. So the Invisible College are supposed to be the good guys. That's what I'm understanding here. So we're going to read Kyle Griffith's part about that. And remember that, boy, that's going to suck if that falls. Remember that he's in a question and answer with the spirit. That's what he's saying here, that he's doing like a Q&A with the spirit that he's channeling. Which I'll leave that up to you. So he asked the spirit, he said, "You've already mentioned the Invisible College many times in this book, implying the general meaning of those spirits on Earth's astral plane who are active, conscious enemies of theocracy." It's like the Jedi and the dark side in the astral plane, right? So at this point, I'd like to discuss the organization in greater detail, what kinds of spirits belong to it, and exactly what does it do to fight against the Theocrats. So the spirit answers him and says, "The Invisible College isn't an organization by the usual definition of that term, because it doesn't have a political structure that all members recognize. The name is just a collective term in common use on the astral plane to describe all disembodied spirits who are not members of the theocratic bands and are not merely lost souls wandering around helpless because they can't function effectively in the spirit world. A synonym in wide use is free spirits, which contain a play on words because free is used in two senses at once. It means free of theocratic control. simultaneously with free to move around the astral plane at will and communicate telepathically with other spirits. There are 3 main groups of spirits in the Invisible College. So I guess if you are one of these, you could be considered a member of the Invisible College according to this book, if you're not a Theocrat, but you're enlightened enough to kind of know what's going on. There are 3 main groups. The enlightened ones, the magicians, and space people. This kind of categorizes a lot of stuff that those 3 things there categorize pretty much everything we talk about. 90% of the YouTube videos I watch, honestly. Enlightened ones, magicians, and space people. The first group of spirits in the Invisible College is the enlightened ones. Most of these spirits were highly advanced in spiritual knowledge and the use of their psychic powers during life, but they were also devout believers in some kind of Eastern religious system that includes Vedanta and Buddhism. They were wise enough to refuse to join. That right there tells me he has something against Christianity and Western religion, period. Because his version, or his spirit's version of enlightened, is kind of like, Eastern spirituality. Definitely not Christianity. You can tell that. I will pick this apart psychologically as we go through this. I apologize, but they were wise enough to refuse to join the theocratic bands associated with their particular sect after death because they could physically perceive the enslavement and exploitation going on in the various heavens. Very few of the Western occultists who have called themselves Illuminati or some other synonym of enlightened ones joined this group after physical death. Most become magicians or theocrats. Oh man, I got something to say on that. Because that does make a little bit of sense, actually. So the enlightened ones could be very useful to our cause, but few of them are willing to stay on the astral plane and help actively fight theocracy. They believe that the theocratic perversions of heaven they observe there are illusions, and that perceiving such illusions proves that they are not yet advanced enough to liberate themselves from the cycle of rebirth. So they go back and live another earthly life, always hoping that the next time they die, they will be worthy to enter the true heaven. They consider the war in heaven an illusion and run away from it, back into earthly existence, which they also consider illusory. So, right here where he says, few of Western occultists who have called themselves Illuminati or some other synonym of enlightened ones join this group after physical death. Most become magicians or theocrats. So if you're enlightened enough to know that this is going on according to this book, then I've actually read books where I think even Dosklos talked about that, where you get a choice, right? Because you're aware enough to know what's going on. You could come back and help humanity, or you can go on to other things. What this guy is saying is that the Theocrats pretty much manipulate you and say, look how awesome it would be. Join us. Become a Theocrat, because you can just vamp all this energy off these souls. You don't have to reincarnate. You don't know what's over there. And if you reincarnate, you could have a crappy life. You could get dealt some crappy cards, Turn that on. And we don't know. It's just better here because you have control and power. And a lot of magicians or Western occultists fall for that, according to this thing. I don't like it. It's too bright. Too much light. Jesus. Okay. So he asked the spirit, the idea that much of the universe is Maya, or illusion, is extremely common in Eastern religion and Western occultism. So where did that come from? And the spirit answers him and says, it's just theocratic propaganda, and the refusal of the enlightened ones to help in the war against theocracy is a perfect example of how effective it is. Physical life on earth is no illusion, nor is existence as a disembodied spirit on the astral plane. What's illusory, he should have just put what's the illusion, or the illusion actually is there, is the claim of the Theocrats to be the gods of various religions, and the lie that their heavens offer the human soul eternal life. Ooh, that's pretty scary right there. That's probably what's scaring Gareth. I mean, reading that, if I was coming to the end of my life, that would freak me out too, for sure. What's up, Ava? And rolling the losing dice. Yo, what's good? Okay. Well, there's some people that actually back that up. I'm not gonna lie to you. There's people that back that part up. There's books and people that have astral travel that back that up. It's making me think about Robert Monroe's book. But remember, this is his first book. All the bad stuff happened to him when he was astral traveling the first time, right? That's when all the bad stuff happened, and he was like at his first level of understanding. So I think he was being attacked or messed with or something by some kind of beings in the astral realm, and he started praying. And this is something I mentioned before in the show. He prayed a lot, like he was. He grew up Christian, but he wasn't really a believer in his older ages, but he still would revert back to it when he was in fear, which is what a lot of us do, right? And so when he had these experiences in the astral realm, he would pray. And he says in the book, not this book, but Journeys Out of the Body, that there were beings around him that were laughing at him and said, listen to him praying to his gods, like they were mocking him for praying. Now, Monroe wrote that in the 60s or 70s, I think, 60s, 70s. This guy wrote this book in the 90s. Just something to think about. So he asked the spirit, he says, well, do any of the saints in the Judeo-Christian religions become enlightened ones after death? You know what he's going to say here, because you can tell he's got a bias against Christianity. But the answer here is, well, this is extremely rare. Most of them become Theocrats if they are devout members of theocratic churches during life, because they get tricked into believing they're in heaven. However, some people who claim to work miracles through faith and religious doctrines have become magician spirits after death. They were really occultists whose faith was merely a sham to allow them to work within the religious establishment. Okay. So then he asked the spirit this. He said, well, I've always had an instinctive feeling that the Vedanta and Buddhism are less exploitive of believers than Judeo-Christianity. Yeah, we can tell, buddy. Even though I knew that the Eastern religions aren't as different from the Western ones as many Americans believe, because they can't tell Eastern occultism from the mainstream of Eastern religion. The information you've just been given about the Enlightened ones probably explain why I felt this way. Even believers in the Western religious systems, whose psychic powers are highly developed, are still quite vulnerable to being enslaved by the Theocrats after death. Whereas simple people in the East often remain free of theocratic control and go on incarnating. I assume this happens because of the Eastern religions teach belief in reincarnation as part of their official doctrine. Well, his spirit's going to say that is correct, right? Like there's nothing, to elaborate, but he does go on and say, however, the actual political structure of Judeo-Christian theocracy on the astral plane is somewhat more complex than we described previously. In reality, the Theocrats in charge of the bands force, that's the astral bands around the earth or something. This is a typo. The Theocrats in charge of bands force may advance souls within these religions to reincarnate, because such spirits don't make very good subordinates, but are too valuable to the religion as a whole to kill. Okay. That just sounds like bullshit to me. Anyways, the average theocratic spirit that we have described so far realizes that religious doctrine and mythology are lies and is cynically seeking immortality and political power. The enlightened ones, although they possess a high degree of spiritual knowledge and psychic development, still actually believe in the doctrine. So therefore, if they joined a theocratic band and observe firsthand however it operates, they might rebel. Because of this, the leaders of theocratic bands usually persuade such spirits to return to Earth to further the interest of religion. The Christian Bible contains references to this if you know what to look for. Well, I would like to hear those references. Let's see. Wouldn't you? So he asked the Spirit, he says, do you mean the passages in which various people asked Jesus if he is Elias or some other Hebrew prophet returned to earth? Yes, liberal Christians often use... Liberal Christians. Come on, man. Liberal Christians often use passages of this type as scriptural authority to support reincarnation, which, of course, they are. So he asked him, so he's just like, so we're supposed to be talking about the invisible college. Now we're back on, if you hadn't noticed, we're back on Christian bashing again, right? Let's see, what's this question here? So what happens if you're chilling in heaven and your great grandmother suddenly dies in heaven, though? I don't know. Marilyn Hughes started the Out of Body Travel Foundation after her experiences in the Astral, which also caused her to convert to Catholic. Yeah, I've had her on the show. She's a pretty interesting guest, actually. I mean, I don't claim... See, this is the difference, right? Like, I can help people get to the vibratory state and just get out of body, but I don't... unless I have some kind of extraordinary, extravagant experience... Like it is, I'm skeptical, but like to claim that you know all that, like almost like you're an expert of the astral realm, which is to be like, this place is to be considered one of the most illusory places for our soul to travel to begin with. It just seems rough. Although, you know, people like Marilyn and other people could, I do believe there are people that can just get out of body and travel at constant without no resistance. Like they don't struggle with it. They don't struggle with the vibratory state. They can just do it. I'm not one of those people. Like I have to focus and even get to that state. Anyways, it's besides the point. So do any of these souls ever see the fallacies in their religious beliefs and become enemies of theocracy if they're raised in the right environment when they reincarnate on Earth? It sometimes happens, but rarely, the Spirit says. None of this is about the invisible college yet. This is still like Christian bashing, in my opinion. So he says the Western fourth stage theocratic religions are actually more sophisticated than the Eastern religions and much harder to break out of once you get taken in. This is because the Eastern religions teach reincarnation as part of their doctrine and because occultists are allowed to work within the total structure of the official religion rather than being cast out of it and openly persecuted as in the West. The second major group in the invisible college are the magicians. The term magician is used very loosely to refer to people who made effective conscious use of their psychic powers while alive and did not voluntarily join a theocratic band after death. It is a very diverse group, and the spirits that compose it belong to many different cultures and social classes during life. These are my kind of people, actually, if you're going along with this story. Many magician spirits belong to the spiritualists, theosophists, Rosicrucians, or other well-known Western occult groups during life, and others belong to occult groups that are usually labeled as pagan religions such as witchcraft, voodoo, Santeria, etc. Still, others had been commercial fortune tellers or psychic healers. Many, this is in parentheses, by the way, he says, many of the magicians in the last category considered themselves Christians and performed their psychic activities in the name of Christ. However, the theocratic churches were afraid of their conscious psychic activities and banned them from membership, so they kept their freedom after death. So there you go. Gareth, like if all you have to do is become a magician and the Theocrats are afraid of you. They can't kill you, so they just kind of ban you from their little group. In the East, Many martial art experts, yogis, tantrists, Zen masters, and Sufis, etc., become magician spirits after death, as do people who make their living doing divination or practicing psychic healing. The shamans of the surviving first stage religions also often join the magician spirits when they die. And what all these spirits have in common is that they had wide practical experience with the operational use of their psychic powers while they were alive on Earth. And this includes some people who had possessed highly developed psychic powers during life but were never consciously aware of them. The average magician had definite religious beliefs during life, but these were not strong enough to compel joining a theocratic band after death. Magicians, living or disembodied, tend to be practical people, not mystics or true believers. Most of the spirit guides who assist occultists all over the world in obtaining spiritual knowledge and in learning conscious control of their psychic powers are magicians. The Theocrats are seriously frightened of the work these spirits do, which explains why fundamentalist propaganda contains such stern warnings against contacting them. So, like, this would make sense, right? If he was right, this would make sense because there's a lot of religious text that warns against, practicing magic or the mysteries or anything like that. If he's right. If you're coming here and you think that I'm here just buying everything in this book, though, you're going to be sadly mistaken because I've already encountered a lot of BS in here. But most books have a lot of BS in them. Like if I wrote a book, I'm sure it would have a certain amount of bullshit in it. Like we all have that. All right, so he asked the spirit, what is this? Yes, so this accounts for all the propaganda against Ouija boards and other aids that help people achieve independent, consciously controlled contact with disembodied spirits. In the light of my present knowledge, all the warnings about demonic possession through engaging in mediumistic working seem especially ironic. It looks to me as if the spirit contact the fundamentalists achieve at service using religious mind control are much closer to the description of possession than what happens to occultists when they hold mediumistic conversations with spirits. That is kind of true what he's saying there. Like if you could watch like you could watch a reel of people that are kind of, like I told you before, like when I went to the Assembly of God, you could just watch reel after reel of people that are saying, I have the Holy Ghost and I have the Holy Ghost in me. And they're flopping around like crazy. They're just flopping. They do look like they look like the definition of possessed. That's all I'm saying. Genevieve says, can you comment on what you might think the void or dark is? If it is not heaven, is it a necessary evil? Well, Dan Lopez was on the show and he talked about how he went into this void place, right? Like, what's up, Jess? What's up, Brian? And it was just darkness, like it was nothing. And a lot of people have talked about that. I don't think that's heaven. What I think that is something that we're afraid of, because if people are actually talking about it, then they were consciously aware of it. And if you listen to, which means they're alive in spirit form or whatever form, whether they see or experience nothingness, they're still aware of it. And if you listen to Monroe talk to some of these people when we listen to the Explorer tapes online, he was scientifically experimenting with people's consciousness, and there were several accounts of people saying they couldn't see anything. Like they couldn't experience anything, or they felt lost. I don't know if you remember that one person that died in a ship or something, and they said they can't see anything, they don't hear anyone, but they still felt the coldness of the ship and things like that. So I think the void represents, I mean, hell, I don't know. I'd have to experience it to even answer that, but I think it could represent just this nothingness And it's almost in an enlightened sense because you're not really projecting your unconscious into anything. So it's almost like you're waiting, right? You're in this waiting period. And then souls either move on or someone helps them move on, or they figure out, well, I have to do something here, you know. In Dan's case, he came back, right? And he was like screaming or whatever and said that he had to pee. I'd love to have him come back on and tell that story again. It was a good story. What else do the magicians in the Invisible College do besides passing information to people with conscious mediumistic powers? So the spirit answers him and says, this is actually one of the less important things they do because there aren't many conscious spirit mediums. However, the magician spirits can communicate telepathically with a much larger segment of the living population on a strictly subconscious level, and they do so very frequently. Such spirits are responsible for many experiences that people call prophetic dreams, flashes of insight, hunches, intuition, instinctive knowledge, etc. However, some of the experiences assigned these names are entirely the product of the person's own subconscious imagination or psychic powers, and there's usually no way to tell the difference. There's that catch-22 thing again. Well, how do I develop my intuition or psychic powers versus my fear and cynicism? Kind of ironic, you know, like that's there, because he's kind of doing that throughout this book, I would say. Hope some of you got what I'm just saying. At this point, it seems necessary to bring up a point that may worry some readers. It's quite natural for people to say, I don't like the idea that a spirit or another person can plant in my mind an idea I will consider the product of my own memory or creative powers. This is an invasion of my privacy and of my right to make decisions for myself. From a purely ethical standpoint, I have to agree completely with the statement. And so, this is a long one. How much time do I got? So the spirit answers him and says, all we can say is, would you rather be drafted into the army to fight against beings as evil as Hitler, or to fight on their side? Most Earth people simply don't have the psychic strength or spiritual knowledge to remain neutral in the war between the Theocrats and the Invisible College. If we don't manipulate them subconsciously, then the Theocrats will do so anyways. Oh, okay. So this spirit, he said, if we don't do that, then the Theocrats will do so anyway. So the spirits are saying here, or he's saying, he's a member of the Invisible College, obviously. We justify this according to our own code of ethics simply by applying the principle of the greatest good. An individual influenced by both the Invisible College and the Theocrats has more freedom in the long run than the one manipulated by the Theocrats alone. That's still, to me, I don't know about you, but you got to tell me the truth and let me decide. This is why I tell some people, don't pray for me, right? Like, don't try to influence my life because you think you know what's best for me. And that's exactly what this person's saying. If there is an Invisible College, that they're manipulating humanity, but for the good, because you don't know any better. Just let that marinate for a minute, right? Like, we want them to learn enough about how mind control operates to avoid situations that expose them to it. Even now, when very few people are consciously aware of the nature of theocracy and the forces opposing it, our methods are still more ethical than those of the Theocrats and their religions. They brainwash people with religious mind control as their strategy of first choice, whereas we employ such methods very sparingly. When we work with people who are consciously learning occultism, we try to inform them exactly what is going on as well as we can. And the more spiritual information they learn and the stronger their conscious psychic powers become, the more they are able to avoid subconscious telepathic mind control by either side in the war in heaven. For example, you seem to be quite capable of questioning us on ethical matters and making your own value judgments about what you receive in the process of writing this book. Let's get back to the description of what the magician spirits in the invisible college do. Placing information about theocracy in the minds of living people is only their second most important job. The principal service they perform for the human race is assisting other souls and reincarnating. It's an old spiritual tradition, so it's to assist other souls in reincarnating. It's an old spiritual tradition that mediums and their spirit guides offer to help the souls of the recently deceased that seem in distress. This sometimes comes to the public attention when it is done after someone has reported seeing a ghost, but many spiritualists do a lot more of it privately. They consider it a good deed they can do in the payment of the good that is done for them by being in direct conscious contact with the spirit world. Unfortunately, the traditional spiritualists and those of their spirit guides who held similar beliefs during life do harm as often as in good when they attempt to aid lost souls, because most of them lack even the most rudimentary knowledge about theocracy. So there's some spirits, so this guy is saying there's some people that are helping spirits move along, like, hey, move along, and they're pushing them into the Theocrats world over there. Maybe he didn't want to cite his sources when he wrote his book, so he just, what are you saying? So he just shortcut it by having his alter ego confirmed. Yeah, that's what I think is going on. Like, kind of like that book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I mean, did he really talk to the devil, or was he just, instead of saying it, he just turned it into the devil character, right? That's what I think too. Let's see. What time do we got here? Like, it's, don't get me wrong, this is a interesting book to read. And I do feel like, based on, so we've done close to 1,000 episodes on the show. Some of them have disappeared over the years, but there's a lot of, let's just say, intuitive truth to some of this. But I still do not believe, I still believe this is one big projection. And that's kind of like an egregore. And I know he gets into elementals too. So for example, like, if we don't understand our own creative power here in the physical realm or astrally, which is kind of all the big same thing, and we've got a lot of people going around talking about a big spiritual war, and we're all being duped. Now, if you get more than 3 people believe in that, 3 or more, right? That's considered an egregore. But if you got thousands and millions of people saying that this is happening or feeling it or discussing it, then it can very well become a reality in the astral realm, in my opinion, which is another danger, which is why I think we don't need to be manipulated. I don't know about you, but we don't need to be manipulated by anybody. I don't care how stupid you think I am. Like, you have to tell me the truth. Like, joy, truth, and love. So love is the answer. You don't get love or to be loved without truth. People love truth. And what I mean by that is, I don't mean subjective truth or this is a perspective or that's a perspective. I mean tested things that are tested and well known to be true, and people that are vulnerable enough to speak their truth and courageous enough to do that. You could take the dumbest person in the world, and if they have those virtues, not only will they experience love in their life, but they will come to know things more consciously. That's my opinion. That's what I think. So we don't need to be like, we don't need more parents. This is what putting away childish things is talking about. We don't need more people thinking they know what's best for us, ever. That's only from the time you're a toddler till you're so high. Then the rest of everything is up to you, and it shouldn't be up to anybody else, ever. Even how you live, I believe even what you think is morally right or wrong, even because that stuff is natural. All the stuff, man. Like, we're not even halfway through this thing, and there are already a lot, in my opinion, a lot of double standards, for sure. Let's go crazy. You're right back.
Ever wondered, what do the stars say for me? Or, will the next month or the next year be more favorable? How about, are our two signs compatible? Each month, at the new moon, you can ask these questions live with me, your astrologer psychic, Mary DeCina, along with host of Lighting the Void, Joe Root. Join us at the new moon for Cosmic Conditions. We look forward to working with your energy.
Every new moon at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fringe FM. The future of medicine is already here. Protect yourself and those around you from the effects of electromagnetic radiation and recharge your body with life energy. This is your chance to take control of your balance, your quality of life, and your future. The effects of syntropic products have been verified from a scientific point of view and can be backed up with research. This is future technology, a biotech enterprise with breakthrough technologies that facilitate the protection, regeneration, and recharging of both human and animal populations. These patented wellness devices can help optimize energy and performance, speed up regeneration, and protect you from the harmful effects of non-thermal e-smog. Get back to feeling your best with a new level of clarity, vitality, and balance with the advanced and effective products of Syntropics. It's as Albert Einstein said, the future is here, and future medicine will be the medicine of frequencies. Get started on your wellness journey by going to advancedwellnesstechnology.com or fringe.fm/bioenergy.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Do you want to know the truth? Are UFOs real? Are aliens visiting Earth? Are governments around the world hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO Seekers, official partner of The Fringe FM, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Join us as we investigate locations like Area 51 by subscribing on YouTube at youtube.com/UFO Seekers.
Musicians experience a lot of frustration with music marketing and promotion. They have no idea how to get their music heard, and they're spending hours sending emails, making phone calls, and hitting up their friends to promote them. With our industry-powered digital marketing platform, we can set up your media plan in minutes. Our team will automatically distribute your music across all the best channels, so you can focus on actually making the music. Submit your music today on our website at mymusicpromoter.com. That's mymusicpromoter.com.
This portion of the show is being brought to you by Honest Ed's Used Cars, where you can be assured that none of our fine previously owned vehicles have ever had their odometers turned back, unless, of course, they had lots of miles on them. That's Honest Ed's Used Cars, where we're not satisfied until you're satisfied, or until we've taken your money, whichever comes first.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void Radio. We're live on Fringe.fm, KTLK Digital Broadcasting. That's www.fringe.fm. We are an 80% listener-supported radio station and 20% sponsorship-supported radio station by the sponsors that we choose. We used to let anybody kind of do sponsorships, but now we vet them because I think it's important. It's a whole egregoric thing, like I was saying before. Also, live on YouTube and Facebook as well. And like I said, we can always use your support. Always. We need it. in order to keep this thing going. Okay. So we're talking about the Invisible College. If you want to call in, that's 501-777-5631, 501-777-5631. When I say Invisible College, I mean specifically how this book portrays the Invisible College, what this guy is writing about through the spirit that he's supposedly channeling. So before we left, he's saying that there's 3 classes of the Invisible College. I don't want to scroll up, but I believe he said the Enlightened ones, the magicians, and what was the third one? I'm going to have to scroll up. There was space people. I can't wait till we get to space people. So he said that some people are not helping. They think they're helping souls by helping them across, but they're really not really helping them. And he says, why is that? So he said, all too often, when spiritualists and similar occultists assist souls in entering the higher astral, they are actually sending them straight into the control of some band of Theocrats to be enslaved and devoured. You know what's interesting, though, real quick, what's interesting is I have this like obsessive thing that I do where there's 3 or 4 books that I read every year, right? So Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, that series of books is definitely one of them, because I feel like this guy's void walking and conscious journey was very genuine. William Buellman's as well, and a couple others that I don't exactly want to recommend right now until I feel good about it. And then what I'll do is I'll relay like some of the stuff that I'm reading or some of the stuff like this, that if there's anything that corresponds with what they're saying. Because here's the thing. This is why I got into the out-of-body experience and magic as a whole to begin with, because there was, between the two people, the people that were exploring with just like void walking, out-of-body stuff, and they were taking the scientific method, staying skeptical the whole time, but still documenting their conscious explorations enough to catch the attention of the government, right? We know that. And the occultists or the magicians, a lot of the things that they encountered were the same, which caught my attention, was interesting to me. So I will say I do find certain things interesting, because here's a guy that wrote a book, and we don't know if he read any of those books. He might have. But here's a guy that wrote a book in 1990 that has some things in this book that kind of go along with those people I was just talking about. Anyways, let's get back on track. Just was thinking about that. So often, he says, all too often, when spiritualists and similar occultists assist souls into the astral, they push them right into some band of Theocrats to be enslaved and devoured. That is because the majority of spiritualists and the magician spirits that serve as their spirit guides are too friendly to deistic religion and too ignorant of the realities of life on the astral plane. This is beginning to change now, but it's still a major problem. In many cases, people who had read a lot of occult literature during life put up more resistance to understanding the true nature of theocracy than atheists, agnostics, and even some believers in Orthodox religion. It's actually easier to show religious people that their gods are imposters than it is to show occultists that there are no planes higher than the astral. The beliefs of the former are easier to refute because they are simple and clear-cut. The delusions of occultists are more complex and sophisticated. Many of them tell us, okay, so some heavens are really hells of psychic vampirism. I'm going to keep looking until I find one that's not. I don't know any occultists that have said that. I don't know where he got that from, but whatever. Maybe they told him that. So unfortunately, there are theocratic bands specifically designed to entrap spirits like this. Bands run by theocrats who were occultists themselves during life. So he asks the invisible, not the spirit. He says, in other words, the Invisible College faces the same problems in dealing with people on the astral plane as I have in getting people on Earth to accept the information described in this book. There are thousands of years of false knowledge to overcome, and virtually every body of available spiritual information is heavily corrupted with theocratic propaganda. It strikes me as miraculous that you were able to start teaching such knowledge widely, both on the astral plane and on the earth. Can you describe how? Well, what about people like Edgar Casey and those type people? Like, there's a lot of things that Edgar Casey experienced that was tested that kind of disproves a lot of this stuff too. It's a mishmash. It gets confusing, doesn't it? So the Spirit says, about 700 years ago, scientists from our world established two-way contact with spirits on Earth's astral plane. Accidents in interstellar transportation had already marooned quite a few extraterrestrial spirits on Earth, but they were not capable of communicating with the societies they'd come from. Ironically, psychic machines capable of establishing such communications existed on Earth's astral plane, but none of the spirits who came here by accident possessed the specialized skills for using them. Psychic machines? That's a first. You guys ever heard of that? Like, the only thing that I've ever heard that was close to that is like the machine elves Terrence McKenna was talking about. Psychic machines. Of course, such spirits were forced to reincarnate periodically, and every time they did so, they lost a portion of their original memories. This meant that Earth people remained ignorant of the basic facts about spiritual reality, including the true nature of theocratic spirits who claimed to be gods. There were always a few spirits around who knew the truth, but they were seldom able to communicate more than hints of it to others before they lost the memory of who they were and where they came from. The two-way contact we speak of roughly coincided with the beginnings of modern Western civilization. There are numerous passages in occult literature from the late Middle Ages on about telepathic conversations between mediums and spirit entities who resemble modern UFO contactee descriptions of space people much more than they do the traditional angels, demons, or spirits of deceased Earth people. Yeah, like Crowley talked about meeting that being that he called Lyam that he drew. It looked like a ET for sure. Several of these accounts include what happens to be advanced information about psychics, astronomy, and other sciences, and is exactly that. The accounts that have survived are just a small part of the whole. As soon as this contact was established, spirits from advanced civilizations started coming to Earth deliberately to attempt to build an advanced civilization here. The fight against theocracy is a necessary negative step that has to be taken before the real goal is accomplished, which is to make Earth a fit place for human beings to live. Doesn't it seem like if I was just to do like a strictly conspiracy radio show, did Freudian go mad? Yeah, I think so. If I was just to do like a radio show that was just not spiritually, but conspiracy show, I could probably take this book and then like do 1,000 episodes around each little part of this book and just freak you out. I bet I could. So he's getting into the space people. So both traditional occult literature and modern UFO contactee stories are full of vague references to these telepathic contacts. But such stories lack sufficient detail to make them credible. Usually they're just full of truisms and banalities that don't much impress the person who hears them. Spirit just says, well, that's true. It's taken centuries to prepare people even to think about what life in a truly advanced society would be like. The process has to be done gradually over a long period of time, and most of it has been done on the level of action, not of intellectual theory. So he asked the spirit, he says, so why couldn't the space people, the spirits from advanced civilizations, take some kind of direct action against the Theocrats right at the beginning? And logically, getting rid of the opposition of the Theocrats would be the first step in building an advanced civilization here, not the last. And the spirit, that's a pretty good question. I would have asked the quote spirit that. And so the spirit says, well, it simply wasn't possible. The space people don't come here physically, but as naked spirits transmitted across vast distances. We come here with a certain amount of knowledge, a small part of which we can communicate directly to Earth people, and with psychic powers that are highly trained but not especially powerful in terms of force. The average theocratic spirit is actually stronger than one of us in terms of sheer ability to radiate psychic energy as a disembodied spirit. This is starting to sound like, Lucasfilm. So why is this? He asked the spirit. It would seem more logical to assume that your better training would give you more raw psychic power as well. Spirit answers and says, this is rather hard to explain, but you should be able to grasp at least some of it. Remember that the space people are as human as you are, though not all of us inhabit bodies at home that resemble yours. Every human soul is intended to link periodically to a body. That means it has a certain size and shape, a fixed composition and patterning of astral matter that is natural for it. A normal spirit can transmit only limited amounts of astral energy through the psychic powers, and this amount of energy is actually lower, not higher, than that which can be radiated by the psychic powers of a similar spirit incarnated in a physical body. So what are you saying? Like that my astral body, since I'm a bigger, thicker man, and it takes me way more like exercise and dieting than some people who are just naturally like skinny, that I have is that what he's saying? Like my genetics, I have some kind of natural, energetic, astral body that fits perfectly in mine? That is amazing. Well, what about people that fluctuate, body types? Just curious. It's kind of stupid to wonder, but I thought about it. Still not learning much about the Invisible College, just other than the 3 types of, that's all we've really learned here. So he says, I'm already familiar with this idea. The incarnated soul draws energy from the physical body to energize its psychic powers. Now, the spirit says, the theocratic spirits are not bound by this limitation because they don't incarnate periodically and don't have to worry about keeping their astral soul in a natural condition. Instead, they absorb energy from other spirits and grow as big as much as they can, like overlords. Abnormal growth gives them access to more internal astral energy and hence stronger psychic powers than a normal spirit possesses. So I wonder if they're like Dragon Ball Z, right? Like, so, these Theocrats, they start out small, and once they start absorbing people, they just power up like, Dragon Ball Z, they become bigger. Is that what it's like? Okay. He says, I understand this. So you are forced to use finesse rather than brute strength in fighting the Theocrats, and also forced to enlist the aid of living people in many different ways. I would also like to point out how closely some of the matters just discussed tie in with certain details in the Shaver mystery, as discussed in Chapter 2. So if y'all don't remember, the Shaver mystery, I think, was like these beings that lived in Earth that came out of caves and stuff. Sounded like complete crap to me and was even considered science fiction, but, whatever. So he says, but what about psychic technology? I know you now, he says, I know you now have access to it. Couldn't space people have activated these psychic machines long ago and saved Earth's people centuries of misery? That's a good question. And he says, we didn't do this until the present because the process requires large amounts of astral energy. One of the reasons we have assisted you in building a physical technology is so that we could tap some of the psychic energy raised by the electronic mind control networks and use it to repair and run psychic machines constructed of astral matter. We could have done it previously only by using the methods employed by a second-stage theocratic religion, mass human sacrifices and mass destruction of human souls. This is far beyond the limits to which we will stretch our ethics. It's a means that no end will justify. We will discuss psychic technology further in Part 3. For now, we'll continue discussing the war that free spirits have been waging against theocracy throughout history starting with the concepts of the devil. Well, how synchronistic? Because didn't Genevieve call in last night and said that she made friends with the devil when she was little and didn't even know that the devil was bad? So Brian says Strieber thinks they're us from the future. Yeah. What's up, Jane? Still doesn't answer why the Theocrats can't be defeated. Yeah, so to me, this is like, you know, if you ever watched a movie or any kind of sci-fi movie where there's hero and villains, the villain always has some kind of major power that can't be stopped. They're always like, if you've noticed this, they're always some, like Lex Luthor. They're either super rich or they have some kind of superpower or they're ultimately manipulating everything. And I really think that there may be, like I said earlier, there may be some real truths in this book, but the whole war thing, the whole comic book kind of character stuff that's going on, I think is a projection. I just do. Like, we assume, and I'll say this again, we assume that because our minds are polar, we're polar beings. We have left brain, right brain. You know, there's alpha and omega. There's relativity here. We assume that when we leave this place, there's going to be another war. There's always that polarity going on. And even astronauts or that's if you believe in space, right? Even people that have been to space can tell you there's no up, down, relativity, and that's just space. So how do we assume that the afterlife works like there's always some war going on? And I think it's a projection. I do, man. I think it's a conscious egregoric projection because we are more at war with ourselves than anything we need to worry about outside of us, you know. Only my opinion. We're all entitled to one, right? So, chapter 17 is about Satan and Buddha. So he says the whole mythology of Satan and the rebellion of the angels was the creation of spirits fighting theocracy long ago. And the original teachings of the Buddhas contain similar elements. Really? So he says, why does the Invisible College deliberately use terms like Satan? Doesn't your use of this kind of terminology make it easier for theocratic propaganda to accuse all of your friends on earth of being devil worshippers? Like Rosicrucians and Freemasons and stuff like that? So the Spirit says, somewhere in this book, we're going to have to deal with the accusations of this sort. So we might as well do it here. We have good reason to use terms that encourage people to take a closer look at the biblical myths about Satan, which we'll describe later. For now, we'll just refute the charge that the Invisible College advocates worship of Satan, because we totally reject the concept of worship as the term is usually defined. Absolute, unquestioning belief in and obedience to a spiritual being or a body of doctrine is what worship is. Individual sovereignty is the most fundamental postulate of the philosophy of the Invisible College. Each person must assume full responsibility for making value judgments on ethical and political matters. We never advocate absolute obedience to any authority, even our own. We urge people to resist orders from leaders if they disagree with them, and to use laws, customs, and ideologies only as guides for making their own decisions on specific issues. Assuming personal responsibility, and he has this highlighted, right? In black. It's like the only thing in this book that I've seen that's like in black. So he has this highlighted. Assuming personal responsibility for running their own lives makes people wiser and stronger, because they are usually rewarded for their successes and punished for their mistakes. Unquestioning obedience to orders or fixed doctrine only makes them increasingly dependent and powerless. To get back to our discussion of the devil, the concept that Satan is a god of evil who demands the same kind of worship as Jehovah or other theocratic concepts of God, and that he tempts people to do exactly the reverse of all the individual ethical principles in the Judeo-Christian moral code, are both theocratic propaganda incorporated into religious doctrine to keep people from understanding our original and constructive purpose in creating the myth about Satan and getting it incorporated in the Bible. Okay, so did I miss something here? What is your purpose about Satan? Maybe he's going to get to that. So he says, this is obvious. He's saying this to the Spirit. This is obvious once you point it out. Satan's got a much more favorable image in literature and folk tradition in all the Judeo-Christian cultures than you'd expect him to have if he was really the archetype of reversed biblical morality that religious doctrine claims he is. Quite true, the Spirit says. It's funny how the Spirit always agrees with him, rarely disagrees, right? Look at the folk tales in which the devil simply opposes the puritanical blue nose aspect of Christian. What is that? I've never heard of that. Do y'all know what that is? Blue nose aspect of Christian morality that say that sex and other sensual pleasures are intrinsically evil. Here we go with the sex thing again. What is this guy, like a sex addict, and he doesn't want to feel bad about it or something? Like, again, I've never heard Christians say, and I'm not just sticking up for Christians here, but I've never heard one Orthodox Christian say that sex is evil. I've heard them say, things about fornication and infidelity are bad or sins because they naturally hurt people or have a cause and effect, so to say. But I've never heard, not any like really conscious Christian say, "Oh, sex is evil," unless it's like your, old powder-wigged Christians. I don't know. We've already pointed out the role these puritanical doctrines play in the religious mind control process. The Theocrats want religious believers to feel guilty every time they feel sexual desire or enjoy any pleasure of the flesh. The guilt literally addicts them to attending church services that subject them to religious mind control. When the devil of folk tradition says that sensual pleasure is not immoral in itself, then he is actually advocating an ethical code superior to the Christian one. Doesn't this make you think though, like so if you're a Christian and you're listening to this, right? There's got to be like a natural thing that's like, oh, well, this is the devil writing this book. Because wouldn't that be what the devil says, right? Word Salad says, these are sounding like the commandments that were witched into the guidestones or etched into the guidestones. Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it? He says, okay, I understand this part enough. Please continue explaining the creation myth in Genesis and the origin of the concepts of Satan and the war in heaven. First of all, a fourth stage theocratic religion has no need for a god of evil to tempt people into sin. The concept of original sin itself makes any sort of devil superfluous. I can't say that word. However, if such a concept survives as an atavism for an earlier stage of the religion's development, it does no harm, any more than did the token sacrifices of doves by the Jews at Jerusalem, as described in the New Testament. Judaism had originally been a polytheistic religion. Well, that's true. The Canaanites, it started from ancient Canaanite gods that were polytheistic, so that's true. Polytheistic. Most of the angels with names ending in IEL had originally been god of, for example, like Barachiel, which is god of lightning. Therefore, Judaism already had a concept of Satan similar to the adversary or trickster, gods and other third stage religions, so to speak. So it was quite natural to incorporate Satan into the creation myth to tempt people into original sin. I wonder how many chapters in this book are like against Christianity, though. This is like the third one, right? So he says, he asked the Spirit, he says, so Was the Hebrew pagan deity Satan originally a god in serpentine form, like Damballa and some of the other African trickster deities? And the Spirit says possibly. We really don't know. What we're telling you here is mostly derived from our knowledge of modern religious and occult works, supplemented to some extent by rumors that have circulated on the astral plane for thousands of years. We have no exact historical details on any of this, just educated guesses. However, the choice of a serpent image for the deity that tempted people in disobeying Jehovah is obvious if you realize that it was enemies of theocracy who dictated the myth in the form which we know it. The serpent was intended as a symbol of reincarnation because snakes shed their skins, leaving behind a casting that resembles a dead snake to a casual glance, while the animal crawls on about its business with a shiny, new, young-looking skin. The Theocrats, who call themselves Jehovah, did not want people to believe in reincarnation, even though the fourth stage, religious concept of dwelling in the house of the Lord forever, was probably not known to the Jews at the time the creation myth was first dictated. You know what, man? Like, if you get into this enough, though, like, if you follow this enough, and I said this when we started getting into this book, like, if you follow this enough, you're going to start believing it. Because I can hear, like, the voice in my head, well, he's got a point. This is what we do and, like, conversate with people, right? So, what's up, Tiffany? You and Juan need to do a show together again. Yeah. Dragon Rose, hey. This is kind of like when people make good points. Like, if you're talking to somebody and they're very good at presenting or very articulate, and they make, I don't know, 7 or 8 good points, well, automatically there's this thing that our psyche does that invests in that person, and that person must know they're just wise or they're telling the truth. Right? So in this sense, he's kind of doing that Q&A thing with the Spirit. And so he's answering his own questions, which some of you have already figured out, projectively through the Spirit, that's kind of giving him this confirmation bias. And these are really wise kind of points if they're true. But if you really step back, you got to keep wiping the slate every time you read a sentence. That's kind of what I'm trying to do here. So if you really step back, and if you're really worried about being tricked, then you have to take all of this with, like, reason and logic. I know that's boring, but you kind of do. And all of this is pure speculation, first and foremost. The only reason why you and I, like, are even tempted to listen to it or consider it or entertain it is because a lot of us have void walked. We've had conscious experiences or mystical experiences, or we have studied or read people that have, and we've seen parallels, and we've experienced stuff enough to know, at least I have, that the astral realm is real. That doesn't mean I'm going to invest in this whole thing, even though all of these points sound good. Right? I mean, this is kind of science fiction too. But so are a lot of our spiritual books. If you looked at them without faith, without anything, read them for pure entertainment, it would be sci-fi. I mean, it would. Okay. He's kind of saying the same thing here about Christians, though. So many scholars today don't think the concept of reincarnation was even known to the Jews at the time, was it? As we've said before, the Spirit says, we have no exact historical knowledge of the time, just an age-old rumor and inference from literature on Earth. However, our best guess is that every human culture throughout history and back into prehistory has had at least a rudimentary knowledge of reincarnation. There are references to it in literature from every culture we know about, including those in the ancient Near East contemporary with the people who wrote Genesis. So we assume the concept was known to them. More important, a small number of people in every culture have always possessed enough conscious past life memories to circulate persistent rumors about reincarnation, even though a theocratic religion does its best to suppress them. Yeah, that's kind of true. So, and aside, I've got to ask another question. I've gotten the impression from what you've told me so far that the Invisible College has only been in existence for a few centuries, that it started around the end of the Middle Ages or after. And if so, who was opposing theocracy at the time of Moses? Or whenever the myth concerning Adam and Eve and the serpent was written? And the Spirit answers him and says, exact names of the forces opposing theocracy are actually arbitrary and unimportant. But I mean, why not tell us? If you know their names, just tell us, man. That, because I just thought of someone I talked to the other day, and I was kind of testing them to. I was being nice, but I was testing them to say if they were telling me the truth. And I know you've done this too, right? And they'll say, "Yeah, I met this person. This crazy thing happened." And you say, "Yeah, what was their name?" That, or you know, that was really cool. What was that person's name? Oh man, like I don't know, Bob. It's not really important. The important thing is that it happened. Do you guys ever really want to, like, if you're really like conspiracy theorists or you really want to truth seek, there's some good stuff on lie detection on YouTube. Like the CIA is trained and all this stuff. And it doesn't mean we're buttheads because we're trying to find lies. Like that's another thing too. If you're looking for lies, you're going to find them, or you're going to assume that everything is a lie. There's an actual training into this, though, that you can take a non-biased medium approach where anything can be true, anything can be a lie, you know, and still there are just certain things people do and say that are just, they're lies every time. It's like it's weird. I know we don't want to believe that humans have unconscious actions that we do every time, all the time, but we do, unfortunately. And that's one of them right there. The exact names or the forces opposing theocracy are actually arbitrary and unimportant. We prefer to reserve the term Invisible College to refer to the highly organized opposition to theocracy that started when large numbers of spirits from advanced extraterrestrial civilizations started coming to Earth voluntarily about 600 or 700 years ago. However, small numbers of such spirits have been accidentally transported to Earth's astral plane throughout history and far back into prehistoric times, and many of them have tried to fight theocracy as best they could. One spirit with advanced knowledge could have been responsible for the creation myth we're describing here. You already understand how the Theocrats dictate Holy Writ to religious believers, don't you? And he says to the spirit, he says, well, I assume from reading about Muhammad and the Quran and similar cases that the process is almost identical to what we're doing here to produce this book. Some form of automatic writing or other mediumistic reception of data from spirits on the astral plane. The only difference is that the spirits involved are Theocrats instead of members of the Invisible College. Look, I think that's a good point to make, right? Especially, you know, people that are orthodoxy people, right? Sorry about the sirens. I don't know if y'all can hear them or not. There's a lot of sirens. So orthodoxy people say, well, this is the law, this is this, and yes, these people were, you know, they translated all this stuff through spirits, right? But all these other people that translated their stuff, they're not legit, but ours is. So you have to look at it like that. Like if you're really going to take this with not a grain of salt, but from a fair approach, every spiritual book, it doesn't matter what it is or how many people believe it or how hard they believe it, every single spiritual book has no credibility realistically other than we translated this stuff from a spirit. All of them. So the word orthodox to me is kind of doesn't really mean anything. It's who do you choose, which book do you choose to believe? Which spirits do you choose to believe? This guy's spirits or that guy's spirits? That's what religion is. That's all it is. Diana Walsh-Pasolka brought up the Invisible College on the Joe Rogan podcast today. Diana Pasolka was on Joe Rogan. That's awesome. I just got through talking to her. I think she's a very interesting person in the UFO field. The Ridley Scott Christian Bale Batman Moses, God being a young boy. I like that version. Yeah. Yeah. What's up, Ron and the doctor and Iblis? All right, let's get, well, no, we still got a little bit before we got to do the radio station stuff. So you're right, the Spirit says. However, it's extremely difficult for mediums themselves to tell exactly who in the spirit world is dictating to them at a given time. That's why we always review everything you receive from us several times and leave you to be the final judge as to whether what you've received is really from us or the Theocrats. So according to this guy, it doesn't matter if it's a religious text. It could be the modern book Conversations with God, the Holy Bible, the Quran. Either, however you want to say that, the Invisible College or the Theocrats in the astral realm are the ones that have kind of really manipulated that situation so you'd believe that. That's what he's saying, right? He asks the Spirit, so I realize that I have to be responsible for that, to ensure that what I receive is internally consistent and agrees with my own traditional judgment based on the evidence available in my memory. I suspect that the Invisible College finds it easier to send anti-theocratic messages to the prophets of theocratic religions who don't normally question divine revelations. That's it for Theocrats to deceive, or than it is for Theocrats to deceive conscious spiritual revolutionaries like me. Yeah, we get it, dude. You're more advanced. Yeah. So the Spirit says yes. Of course he says yes, right? And this is exactly what happened with the myth about the serpent and the fall. A spirit hostile to theocracy managed to dictate the story to one of the Hebrew prophets, and somehow it survived long enough in folk tradition to be written into the Old Testament. And we're glad it did, because it reveals some important spiritual truths to anyone capable of understanding them. One is that Jehovah has an enemy who communicates with people and urges them to rebel. And two, another is that these messages of rebellion are involved with ethics and morality. Jehovah says, right and wrong are only what I tell you they are, and they are absolute values that never vary. Satan, on the other hand, says, use your intellect to determine what is right and wrong in a given situation, because such value judgments are highly dependent on the environment you're in at the given time. And since the latter statement is rational and the former irrational, people are put into conflict with theocratic religious doctrine every time they use their intellect to make rational value judgments. That makes a lot of sense, but what you're not saying there is, I don't think people used their intellect, right? So let's say the 10 Commandments are BS, okay? That God didn't make them or whatever. But somebody decided, and this is just my opinion, okay? This is only my opinion. But somebody decided to make them a dogmatic law. I don't think they did it. I don't think they did it based on the intellect. I personally don't. I think they did it based on how they felt, because your feelings are your truth, right? It doesn't mean, I'm not talking about how we react emotionally is our truth, but our deepest feelings, what we're feeling a thing about, is true. So when you murder somebody or you lie or you steal, unless you're a sociopath, okay? And the definition of a psychopath is someone that uses another person for, I was just talking about this earlier before the show with some friends and my son. The definition of a psychopath is someone that uses another person for their own temporary pleasure, like temporarily uses a person for their own temporary pleasure or gain. Think about that. That involves a lot of things. So when people lie, steal, cheat, do things like that, it hurts, right? And after it hurts enough, I think these people come along and say, God told me to make this law, and if you don't do this, you're going to be punished. When I don't think they use their intellect at all, when really enough people could just come together and say, hey, man, let's, based on our environment, like he's saying, how do you all feel about this? And just listen to everybody's truth and say, well, let's call this morality. Let's say that we don't do this. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I don't think it has to be it doesn't have to be, no doubt that the 10 Commandments could be BS, right? But I think that could be one of the reasons why laws came into being to begin with, for political reasons, population control reasons, but just how they feel. The same reason why religions, and this is only my opinion, ancient religions pushed marriage and monogamy a lot, because there's an energetic thing that happens there. There's a sacred energetic thing that happens there, and there's feelings that happen when people get betrayed and stuff like that, right? So people don't want to feel those things. You ever heard anybody say this? And I've said it myself. I'd rather take an ass whooping than get my heart broke, or I'd rather do this than that. Yeah, it's considered normal in our society. It's bad, but it's not like a normal thing. But if you look at religion, it's a commandment. And the only reason I think any of this is happening is because there's no trust, and people don't speak their truth, and people aren't open and vulnerable enough. If enough people sat in a group and said, this makes me feel that way, this makes me feel this way, okay, we'll take our group over here, you take your group over there, things would be fine. We wouldn't even need any of this shit. I'm going on a rant here. Sorry. He says most organized religions seem rather proud of the fact that people have to accept their doctrine on faith simply because it isn't rational. And the Spirit answers him and says, well, they do because they have no choice. And this religious myth is one of the reasons why. The Theocrats don't want people to become consciously aware of the basically illogical nature of absolute moral doctrine, but there is nothing they can do about it. The more highly developed a person's rational intellect, the less likely he or she is to accept religious doctrine or blind faith. The serpent myth is only a minor detail in Judeo-Christian mythology, but it has been very important over the centuries in the fight against theocracy. And it's also obvious why the Judeo-Christian Theocrats countered it with further mythology about Satan as the father of lies, who goes around telling people it's good to kill and steal and otherwise do the opposite of the religious moral code. The Theocrats tried to obscure the information about using the intellect to make ethical decisions on a rational basis. They added many extraneous details to the mythology about Satan. For example, they included the idea that telepathy, mediumship, and other human psychic powers are either works of God or works of the devil. There's no in between. It's either a work of God or a work of the devil. And this allows them to forbid religious believers to communicate with spirits hostile to theocracy without revealing various facts about spiritual reality that the Theocrats wish to conceal. And then there's all the propaganda about demonic possession. As we discussed earlier, the irony of the whole concept of possession is that the Theocrats themselves practice something similar, rather similar to it, when they program people into becoming willing slaves through religious mind control. The important thing to remember whenever possession is mentioned is simply this: no spirit, theocrat or otherwise, can actually force living people to do things contrary to their conscious will and their customary ideas of right and wrong. And I believe that too. I do believe that. That is kind of the magician belief about the will, you know. Even religious mind control can only reprogram a person's opinion and beliefs one small step at a time. It's a slow, gradual process, not a sudden, dramatic takeover. Yeah, I see what he's saying, because I've seen people, like happy people that were confident. They had a massive amount of self-esteem and that were confident, and they get into a situation with their family, relationships, religions, whatever, and slowly over time, they've lost who they were. They've just lost all of that, because you can't come right out of the gate and hit somebody with like really hard guilt trips and really hard stuff like that. You have to slowly, like, are you sure about that? Or why do you do this? Like you do, slowly chip them away at a time, and then eventually they unconsciously become invested in it. It's very important for the reader to realize this. But I'm just talking about manipulation, not theocrats or anything like that. So, shit. However, we do have to point out that even gradual reprogramming can produce some extremely evil and violent people if it continues over a whole lifetime. There are plenty of people in this country right now who are emotionally and morally capable of killing, he puts in here, quote, killing a commie for Christ, or acting on the literal meaning of the biblical message, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Yeah, well, yeah, there's bad people out there for sure. Hopefully we don't, like that kind of bad people. Hopefully we didn't bury our heads in the sand and we don't believe that. So, and they're still doing that to this day in the East, especially. They stone people that they think are witches. Certain parts of the world. However, this has nothing to do with the sudden violent possession by evil spirits, or quote, violent possession by evil spirits. The fundamentalist propaganda spread around so freely, and that many serious occultists also accept, that fortunately is a myth. Well, I hope that's a myth. I'm sure that's going to light some people up. They're going to be like, no, possession is real. Okay, whatever. Some things I agree with, some things I don't. Dr. Seuss, I believe, Brian says, yeah. What is this reading from? Ron Tate asks. It's called War in Heaven by Kyle Griffith. That's the name of the book. We've been doing this whole series because we had a gentleman that he has an ALS, and he's a listener who's in the last stages of his life, and he's scared because he read this book. And so I thought we would read it, give our opinions on it, and try to help him. So this whole series has been about, other than my entertainment of some of the BS in it, there's some truth stuff in there too. But anyways, short break. This is the last one of the night, 3 minutes for the radio station. Live on fringe.fm. If you're enjoying this broadcast, or if you find any value in it, please support us at fringe.fm. There's a donation page there. All amounts, it doesn't matter what they are, will help. We'll be right back.
Ahoy there! This is Gigi from Shift Happens. And holy shit, you're listening to KTLK, The Fringe FM. Hey, don't you dare turn that stuff.
I'm 54, so basically, it's too late to start saving for retirement, right?
Not right. Starting to save, even in your 50s, can really make a difference.
Well, right now, saving seems hard to wrap my head around. Plus, with the way this year's been going...
Hey, listen, it's okay. You still got this. Just go to aceyourretirement.org. It's an online tool from AARP that can help you get your retirement savings on track no matter your age. It's free and only takes about 3 minutes.
I like 3 minutes.
Yeah, at aceyourretirement.org, you'll chat with Avo, the friendly digital retirement coach. Just answer a few questions and you'll get a personalized plan and tips to help boost your retirement savings. Tips that are easy to understand and tailored to your lifestyle.
I like that too.
Plus, it's sponsored by AARP, so you know they got your back. Just head to aceyourretirement.org and make your plan to start saving for retirement.
Thanks.
That's aceyourretirement.org. A message from AARP and the Ad Council.
Have you ever wondered, what do the stars say for me? Or, will the next month or the next year be more favorable? How about, are our two signs compatible? Each month, at the new moon, you can ask these questions live. with me, your astrologer psychic, Mary DeCina, along with host of Lighting the Void, Joe Root. Join us at the new moon for Cosmic Conditions. We look forward to working with your energy.
Every new moon at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fringe FM.
Legal advice for today's show is being provided by the House of Shysters. Remember our motto, in every cloud there's a silver lining, and in every silver lining there's a loophole. This portion of the show is being brought to you by okra. Yes, when searching for a repulsive vegetation to liven up an otherwise tasty meal, more people choose okra than any other semi-edible. This announcement paid for by the National Association of Farmers, who want to see how many dumb city slickers we can convince this gunk is actually food.
Yohoy there, it's Gigi from Shift Happens, and you're listening to the one and only Fringe FM. Well, at least I'd imagine so. I'm not sure how else, you'd be hearing this.
What's the matter? You want to live forever?
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio.
No comments tonight. Interesting. 501-777-5631. 501-777-5631 is the call-in number. If you want to chime in on this story, you can catch us live on fringe.fm or Facebook and YouTube. And got some pretty interesting stuff in the chat. I wish I could keep up with it all. Like, when we're not into a book, I'll be able to, keep up with the chat a little bit more. But yeah, that's interesting. I want to hear Diana's show with Joe Rogan, and I'm kind of glad that Rogan's getting back into these subjects a little more. There was a time when I was worried that he wasn't gonna get into the UFO field stuff, because he used to laugh at Duncan a lot about it, right? But that's good. It's good to see her on there. We only got a few minutes left. I barely took that break. So here's the thing that I'm considering doing. If we hit our goals, as far as donations go, other than a few sponsors, we'll nix all the commercials, because the commercials pay for the music licensing and all kinds of stuff there. I know they're kind of a pain, but I try to make them as short as possible. And that helps us pay for that stuff, because it's expensive. But that's only my thing. So keep that in mind too, because I like radio and I like to be able to play what I want to play and say what I want to say. That's it. So to keep that going and this whole thing, yeah, we would definitely, right now more than ever, yeah, we do need any support that you can bring in. And if you can't, damn it, I understand. Trust me, I get that too. All right, so it's obvious. He's saying stuff here that's obvious in the book. Religious mind control can only reprogram a person's opinions and beliefs one small step at a time. It's a slow, gradual process, not a sudden, dramatic takeover. Well, if you're any kind of a sociopath or good manipulator, you know that, right? You don't have to. It doesn't always have to be religious mind control things. So he says, however, we do have to point out that even gradual reprogramming can produce some extremely evil and violent people if it continues over a whole lifetime. There are plenty of people in this country right now who are emotionally and morally capable of killing. I already read that part. YouTube probably don't like that, but understand, YouTube, that he's making a point. There's people that are capable of killing. I'm not promoting that. So you must remember that the tree of life is mentioned by the Theocrats so that they can gloat. So the Theocrats can gloat that they pretended people from gaining this knowledge. What? Is he talking about the serpent myths here? Let me go back here. You haven't covered the tree of life yet. What was that supposed to represent? As the serpent myth represents the concept that people have the right to determine good and evil for themselves through the free exercise of conscious intellect. The tree of life represents certain essential details of the breakthrough information. The concepts that people can only achieve immortality through reincarnation, and that the internal life in heaven offered by deities is a delusion. However, you must remember that the tree of life is mentioned only so the Theocrats can gloat. I get that now, okay. They can gloat that they prevented people from gaining this knowledge. So the myth states that Adam and Eve ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge and learned to distinguish right from wrong with the rational intellect. But they were expelled from the Garden of Eden before they could eat also of the fruit of tree of life, that is, also in the garden, and become like unto us, or become like us, it says in the book. So many occultists and biblical scholars have been intrigued by that passage, not just for the tantalizing reference to a secret of immortality, but because it's one of the only passages in the whole Bible in which Jehovah uses the first person plural, us instead of me. The secret referred to in this passage is not just immortality, but the complete knowledge that theocratic spirits have about the nature of the soul, reincarnation, psychic powers, etc. Apparently, the spirit who dictated these passages tried to communicate the whole breakthrough and failed. The beginning of Buddhism is a similar case in which the enemies of theocracy tried to help people to make the breakthrough, but didn't quite succeed. And after the Buddha achieved enlightenment, he made some statements that seemed self-contradictory, at least on the surface. He attributed his spiritual progress to his own efforts, not to a gift from omnipotent deities. He also stated, in so many words, that ordinary people could achieve enlightenment through practicing the proper psychic development techniques. But at the same time, his statements about reincarnation appeared paradoxical. He said that achieving enlightenment meant that he no longer needed to reincarnate, but he also said that he would continue to do so to help other people achieve enlightenment. I don't know what that proves, but okay. So this seems to be a major contradiction, this guy is saying to the spirit. Because if enlightenment had made him sort of a super god, superior to the Vedantic gods, then he wouldn't need to incarnate to assist people in spiritual development. He could do it as a disembodied spirit, remaining on the astral plane and using his enormous psychic powers to communicate whatever information people needed. The spirit says, well, once people make the breakthrough, it becomes obvious that there's no contradiction in any of these statements about the Buddha. What the Buddha called his enlightenment is actually a version of this breakthrough. He became consciously aware of exactly what the Vedantic gods really are and how they operate, even though the words in which his followers wrote down his knowledge are somewhat confusing. They understood the most important part of his message quite clearly. The path to enlightenment is the disciplined practice of various psychic development techniques. Notice, too, that the Buddha himself didn't limit his followers in which specific techniques they used, because part of his knowledge must have been that different techniques work better for a given individual than others. He was quite vague on this, and Buddhists ever since have practiced a wide variety of techniques drawn from yoga, tantra, and other sources within the Vedanta. However, the basic techniques of Buddha are anti-deistic, whereas those of Vedanta were highly deistic. Many modern Buddhists believe that if they personally achieve enlightenment, their souls will merge with the soul of Buddha into nirvana, a state of blissful nothingness. Vedantic doctrine in the time of the Buddha already taught that enlightened souls would merge with Brahma or some other god. This doctrine was grafted onto the Buddha's teaching after his death when Buddhism was taken over by the Vedantic Theocrats. So even Buddhism was taken over by the soul-sucking Theocrats, okay? So you're saying that Buddhism was originally founded to fight theocracy? Yes, he says. So were Gnosticism and some forms of early Christianity. But to get back to Buddhism, the Buddha implied by his own example that the enlightened were capable of transcending reincarnation but deliberately chose not to do so in order to be of service to the human race. The Buddha realized he could become a theocrat and remain on the astral plane indefinitely, but he refused to do so for ethical reasons. So to remain, just so you guys remember, I think I'm correct here, to remain as a theocrat in the astral plane indefinitely. You have to vamp souls, right? This interpretation of the early Buddhist teaching is possible for people who have already made the breakthrough from some other source, but it is not stated clearly enough in the writings themselves to make finding and understanding it very easy. Even though he founded a major religion, the enlightenment the Buddha achieved was still only a partial breakthrough, and much of what he learned from the invisible college was on a subconscious level. It is reflected indirectly in his various teachings, and practices are described by his followers after his death when they wrote the early literature, but much of it never came out in so many words in his actual teachings. Man, I thought I was gonna, I might be able to get to the end of this. I gotta hurry though. So I've noticed another seemingly incongruity about the teachings of Buddha. He stresses that enlightenment is achieved only through psychic development practices, but most of his actual sermons or lectures seem to be on ethics. Buddhist ethics are very similar to the traditional Vedantic ethics of the culture he lived in. He stressed certain elements more than others. For example, total nonviolence against both people and animals. But these were already present in the Vedantic doctrines, which contained many inconsistencies. And the Spirit says, yes, he preached a version of the Vedantic ethical code and religious customs stripped of some of the worst self-contradictions, like the concept of nonviolence coexisting with animal sacrifice and with various forms of violence against oneself in the name of religious practice. However, it is easily misunderstood what he was actually doing, which was to separate ethics from the process of achieving enlightenment. In other words, he's asking the Spirit, he said living ethically was important, but not directly related to the psychic development that causes enlightenment. Yada, yada, yada. Modern Buddhism, except for a few occult groups, associated it with a theocratic religion. Buddhists feel that their ethical conduct as well as their psychic development practices will earn them enlightenment by pleasing various incarnations of the Buddha, all of which are imagined to coexist as gods, similar to the Vedantic gods. This is not what Buddha taught at all. And he asked the Spirit, he says, well, there's certain Zen masters who my class with the occult minority within Buddhism have said things like, there are no gods, there are no Buddhas. So the Spirit answers him and says, when they do this, they are fighting against the tendency of the majority of Buddhists to worship the Buddha as a god, instead of seeking enlightenment through their own efforts and practicing ethical conduct of humanistic reasons to serve their own interests and of other people instead to earn divine favor, which is kind of like all this vanity in Ecclesiastics, right? Zen masters have even told students who were drifting into deism, contemplate the Buddha as a piece of dried shit. So he asked the Spirit, and this is the last part, before I made the breakthrough, I put a pantheistic interpretation on passages like this. The Buddha is everywhere, including in the desiccated turd. Now I see that this is an attempt to answer the theocratic tendencies in Buddhism by trying to extinguish the believer's tendency to fall into deism. You got to be careful when you read about secret societies of this type. Okay, I have to say this because it's about secret societies. Then we'll end this thing tonight. So the Spirit says, this is anti-deistic, anti-theocratic teaching is even more evident in the doctrine of some of the Eastern occult secret societies involved with martial arts. These secret societies have often worked under the direction of the Invisible College to fight against the control of both religion and politics in China and Japan by the Theocrats. That's why they sometimes tell initiates, we are devils, because they are literally fighting against the gods in the sense of fighting deism and defending the idea that people can achieve enlightenment through their own efforts. However, you have to be careful when you read about secret societies of this type, because many of them have fought for the Theocrats at one time and against them at other times. Well, that makes it a lot more complicated, doesn't it? And depending on the personalities and beliefs of the members, at this point we'll leave the adversaries of theocracy within religion and go back to discussing the work of the Invisible College in building modern Western civilization. So I tried to do a show. I kind of was hoping that this wouldn't happen. I thought he was just going to talk mainly about the Invisible College the entire time, but you got the book. Yeah, well, you have to remember the only reason why I'm reading this book is I'm trying to pick it apart for a person that it's scared, and I've already found a lot of BS in it. But it is an interesting run, nonetheless. So, yeah, we got to roll out of here, and we'll be back tomorrow night. We do the talk show Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursday nights. The music show on the radio station. Fringe.fm on Monday nights, which is just a radio music show, which we have a lot of fun with. And, you know, if you don't just want to support and you want to get something for your support, you can go to fringe.fm/deep void. I have a $5 membership where all the shows, all the way back to like 2017, are totally ad free. And that's a lot. Hours and hours of broadcasts with awesome guests, man. Yeah, I've had some pretty awesome guests on the show. And, there's extra content in there too, as well. And it's only $5 a month. So you can go to fringe.fm/deep void. All the stuff will be in the links. You guys have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow night. Love you. Happy astral traveling. Sweet dreams to each and every one of you. Thanks for chatting it up with us.